This week we are going to take a look at adding on to our discussion about developing our concepts and our hypotheses and how we're going to collect data and what types of data are we going to collect by talking about concepts, operationalization, and levels of measurement. Because measurement is often difficult and precise, it seems like when we talk about measurement, you think, well, then it's going to be precise because we're measuring something. But the problem is that researchers have to try to describe the measurement process so explicitly that someone else could come behind them and do the exact same measurement. And with social sciences, that's hard. Like, if we want to measure crime in a community, well, what is it that we're measuring? Are we measuring violent crimes? Are we measuring drug crimes? Are we measuring all crimes, which would include jaywalking and those sorts of things? So thinking about how we measure something can be difficult. Seems easy at the beginning, but can be difficult. So we want to move away from vague ideas of what we want to study. Say we are interested in human trafficking, okay? That's a great topic. There's lots of research that you can do on that topic, but it's very vague. International human trafficking, trafficking in the United States, trafficking in St. Louis, trafficking in Cape Girardeau. So we want to narrow it down to being something that we can recognize and measure in the real world. Otherwise, we're going to be unable to communicate how our ideas are really relevant and how those findings can apply to our audience. So the first thing we want to think about are the conceptions and the concepts. Right? So we want to clarify these abstract mental images. Like I mentioned, we want to know what is the definition of a crime. Okay? Think about the conception. What is the mental image that we have about something? How did we develop our view of that term? Right? So if I say drug dealer, the concept that most of us have is an illegal drug dealer, right? But isn't a pharmacist also a drug dealer? So we have to think about what's that mental image just when we say a word in our research. What's that mental image that is created? And then think about our concepts, right? What are the words, the phrases, the symbols that are used to represent these mental images in our communication? Some examples that your textbook brings up is like gender, punishment, chivalry, delinquency, poverty. Those are all things that can come out of our conception of crime. So getting that down on paper. Three classes that scientists measure. Okay. One is direct observables. These are things or qualities that we can observe directly. Like, what color is the average female wearing in a particular class? Or what are the males in the class wearing, jeans or khakis, right? So it can be something as simple as that. In concept, it seems simple. But if I say how many people in the class are wearing a blue shirt, what is your concept of blue? Would you consider like a teal? Would you even consider that a blue? What about a light blue versus a dark blue? Would you only count like a navy blue color as what you consider blue? So sometimes even things that we think, oh, this will be easy, can get difficult when we are trying to either express that concept or measure that concept. Then you can have indirect observables, and these require a little more detail. Okay? So they may be more subtle or complex or indirect observations. Like if we're looking at reports or court transcripts or criminal history records, there's lots of things that you can pull out of that. And it's not something that we have observed ourselves. If we're reading a police report, okay, we're observing what went on in that report, but indirectly, we weren't actually there. And then we can measure constructs, and these are theoretical creations. They can't be observed directly or indirectly. They're similar to a concept. Okay? So when we talk about the term conceptualization, and I think with this class, I'm going to push pause for just a minute on this chapter. A key piece of this class is vocabulary and understanding the vocabulary and understanding how it applies to a particular concept or theory or premise. So this class is more than just learning the vocabulary. You've got to know the vocabulary to do well in the class, that's for sure. But you have to apply the vocabulary, the theories, the premises. So a lot of, if you notice on the quizzes and the exams, a lot of it is examples, because you can just spit back vocabulary to me, but the only way that I know you truly understand the theories and the premise and the concepts behind that vocabulary is for you to be able to apply it to an example. With conceptualization, so this is a definition thing that's going to apply to examples. It's going to apply to quite a bit that we talk about in the rest of the class. We are specifying precisely what we mean when we use particular terms. It's often a set of indicators of what we have in mind, and it indicates a presence or an absence of the concept we're studying. For example, if we are measuring violent crime, we would define that or conceptualize that as offender uses force or threatens to use force against a victim. So we would come up with our conceptualization of violent crime. Your textbook also talks about indicators and dimensions. A dimension is a very specific aspect of a concept. Crime seriousness can be subdivided into dimensions. Could be the dimension that we use is victim harm. Is that physical injury? Is that economic loss? Is that psychological consequences? The specification allows us to lead to a deeper understanding and help us get a grasp of exactly what it is we're studying. And as we're going through each of these chapters, think about your research proposal. Think about your topic. How will you narrow that down to something that is researchable? And how will you conceptualize your hypothesis, your definitions? Thinking about all of those things as you read through these chapters, be sure and be looking at it through the frame of your own research project. Concepts are abstract and only mental creations. The terms we use to describe them do not have real and concrete meanings. Think about it. When we say, what is poverty? Do you live in poverty? Well, what is poverty? That's a pretty relative term, right? For some in the United States, poverty is not having an iPhone. For others, poverty is not having a house. And then for others, poverty is not being able to feed yourself or your family. Same with delinquency. For some, getting sent to the principal's office is delinquency. For others, they'd be like, unless you get arrested, I don't consider that delinquency. What about strain? For some individuals, they turn to a life of crime because they want a particular pair of tennis shoes, or they want a TV, or they want something that is of minimal monetary value. And again, that's even a relative term, right? What's minimal for me might not be minimal for someone else. Other individuals experience much more strain. Maybe they're homeless, but they don't choose to go out and commit a crime. So that strain can even be a relative term. Okay? The process of regarding things as real that are not is reification. All right, so how do we create this conceptualization order? Okay. The first thing we want to do is come up with a conceptual definition. What is SES, let's say? We want a working definition specifically assigned to a term that provides focus to our observations. And it gives us specific working definitions so that the readers will then understand the concept. Just a review. SES is social economic status. Okay? So then, once we have our conceptual definition, okay, what's going to be our definition that our readers will know, understand the concept, then we have to develop an operational definition. How will we measure socioeconomic status? So we've got our concept. What is it? Okay. Then we have to decide how will we measure it. And your operational definition spells out precisely how the concept will be measured. So the progression of measurement steps is that you come up with your overall concept, what you want to study. Then your conceptual definition, and then which is how you will define it for your reader, and then your operational definition of how you will measure that, and then you can bring those measurements into the real world. You want to make sure you can, right? So let's talk a little bit about your operationalization. Say that 5 times real fast. Your choices. Okay, this is the process of developing those operational definitions. So it moves us closer to a measurement. It requires us to determine what type of data are we going to collect. Is it going to be qualitative data? Is it going to be quantitative data? Are we going to do a survey? Would a face-to-face interview be better? How are we going to measure crime reduction, for example? So thinking about all of those things. We have to look at measurement or consider what our scoring is going to be, where we're assigning numbers or labels to a unit of analysis in order to represent those conceptual properties. We're making observations and we're assigning scores to them. It's difficult in CJ or any type of social science research because basic concepts are not perfectly definable. So sometimes we really struggle with this. Every variable should have 2 important qualities when you're thinking about, what are the variables in my research. One is they should be exhaustive. So you should be able to classify every observation in terms of one of the attributes composing the variable. So in other words, think of all the options. And again, sometimes that seems relatively simple. What if I ask for gender? It's male, female, right? But what if someone considers themselves transgender? Or what if someone doesn't consider themselves as any specific gender? So you want to make sure that you think about every possible observation. Say if I'm asking, I'm sending out a survey to students and I want to know if they're freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That seems pretty exhaustive, right? But what if they're a returning student? Or what if they're a grad student? Or what if they're a high school student taking it for advanced placement? So make sure when you're thinking about what variables, when you're putting your survey together, maybe that's what you want to do for your research proposal, think about, is it exhaustive? Have I covered all of the options? Okay. And then it also has to be mutually exclusive. So you must be able to classify every observation in terms of one and only one attribute. Okay. The example your textbook gives is employment status. Okay. Making sure that you can't fall into 2 different categories. Now, another key component, and if you've taken statistics already, this is kind of a review, is you need to consider your levels of measurement. And there are 4 basic levels of measurement. The first is nominal. I think of this as labels or names, okay? Race, gender, the state of where you live, your state of residence. They are simply names. I can't put them in any order. I can't say one is better than the other. They are just names, assigned names. Ordinal is a step higher, okay? And this is where the attributes can be logically rank ordered. Like if I ask, are you freshman, sophomore, junior, senior? If you tell me you're a senior and the person next to you tells me they're a freshman, I can automatically infer that the senior has more hours than the freshman. However, I cannot tell how many more hours. I can just rank them. Okay. Interval gives you meaningful distance between the attributes. The example your textbook gives is temperature. If you tell me it's 52 this morning and then it's 72 this afternoon, I know there's a 20-degree difference. Okay? I can tell, and that's meaningful. IQ is another example. Ratio also has that meaningful distance, but it has a true 0 point. Right? Temperature, you can have a negative, right? Ratio would be like age. You can't be -1, right? -0. The number of priors that you can't have a negative number of priors. So these are the levels of measurement, and why they're important is because based on this level of measurement determines a number of different things. The type of data that you can gather, the type of statistical analysis that you can do. So the higher up, right, nominals at the bottom, then ordinal, then interval, then ratio. The higher up you can go, the more inferences that you can make, right? And so there's some implications of choosing a particular level of measurement. As I said, certain analytical techniques have levels of measurement requirements. The other thing is that ratio, you can treat that as nominal, ordinal, or interval, but you can't take nominal, you can't take gender and make that a ratio level of measurement. So you cannot convert a lower level of measurement to a higher one. So therefore, you want to seek the highest level of measurement possible or that's reasonable so that it gives you more options. The key standards for measurement quality are reliability and validity. Okay? Measurements can be made with varying degrees of precision, right? Common sense dictates that the more precise, the better. So the more precise you can get your data, the better. However, it's often impossible to get complete precision or exact precision. So we look at reliability, and this is whether a particular measurement technique, if it's repeated over and over and over to the same object, would it yield the same result each time? The problem comes up is even if the same result is retrieved, it may be incorrect every time, right? So reliability does not ensure accuracy. And we also have to recognize that the observer's subjectivity might come into play. But the thing we want to strive for is that our measurement instrument is reliable and that we're getting consistent results each time. So there are some methods that you can develop to deal with reliability issues. You can do a test and a retest method. So you make the same measurement more than once. And if you do that, you should expect the same response both times. You can use what we call inter-rater reliability, where you have multiple raters and then you compare their measurements and you verify if they're getting basically the same results. And then you can do the split half method, and this is where you make more than one measure of any concept and you see if each measures the concept differently. So maybe I'm looking at students' opinion on legalization of marijuana. I could do a split half method where I have one question that presents it in a positive light and another question that presents it in a negative light. So you would expect that the respondent would have two different answers. The other is validity, and this is the extent to which an empirical measure adequately reflects the meaning of the concept under consideration. And we talked about validity in the last chapter. Are you really measuring what you say you're measuring? Demonstrating validity is more difficult than demonstrating reliability, because how do you know if you're not measuring what you say you're measuring? Because you've set up your research to address the validity, so you think you've got it. Okay, There's some methods with dealing with validity. One is just looking at the face validity. On its face, does it seem valid? Does it jibe with other common agreements and mental images? Criterion-related validity compares a measure to some external criterion. Construct validity is whether your variable relates to another in the logical expected direction. Content validity, does the measure cover the range of meanings included in the concept? And then just having multiple measures, right? Alternative measures could also help address any validity issues. Your textbook also talks about composite measures, and this allows us to combine individual measures to produce more valid and reliable indicators. So the reasons for using a composite measure is, one, the researcher is often unable to develop a single indicator of a complex concept. Okay. If I'm conducting an interview of someone who's a victim of a crime and I'm wanting to know the impact of being a victim of that crime, is there one single question that I could ask? Probably not. Okay. So we may want to use a rather refined ordinal measure of a variable, arranging the cases in several ordinal categories from very low to very high. Okay, indexes and scales, Likert scales. You may have taken surveys that ask if you strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, right? That's where you're taking those ordinal measures of a variable and rating, asking the individual to rate them from very high to very low. Okay. You'll also see typologies. These are produced by the intersection of two or more variables to create a set of categories or types. Okay. The example in your textbook is typology of delinquent criminal acts. Okay. Time 1 and time 2. And so you'll see these a lot, typologies for serial killers, typologies for juvenile delinquents, typologies. Again, it's that intersection of two or more variables that create a set of categories. Index of disorder. Your textbook talks about this one. This is an example. Distinguish between physical presence and social perception. Okay. So the index is created by averaging scores for each measure, looking at physical disorder and then looking at social disorder. There are some benefits of using indexes. One, it can be more valid than just a single question. Like I said, sometimes, particularly in social science, criminal justice, there's just not one question you can ask to really address the concept. So computing and averaging scores across all items in the category can create more variation than we could obtain in a single item, a single question. 2 indexes are more parsimonious than 9 individual variables. So data analysis and interpretation can be more efficient if we are developing those indices. So that's everything I have for Chapter 5. The key thing with Chapter 5 is really thinking about, in relationship to your research project, what is my main concept? How do I define that concept? How do I develop that operational definition? How do I measure that concept? And then recognizing there are different levels of measurement. So those are really the key pieces that come out of Chapter 5, along with thinking about, would my research be reliable and would it be valid? So that's really what you should focus on for this week and also as you're thinking about your research project.